At Westwood University, Professor Evelyn Carter wasn't just an educator. She was a lifeline. For over 25 years, she had dedicated her life to shaping young minds, guiding students with unwavering warmth and integrity. Her reputation wasn't merely built on academic excellence, but on her relentless commitment to her students' success. She had a gift. She didn't just teach, she inspired. Her lectures weren't just lessons. They were experiences. Students adored her, faculty respected her, and in the close-knit town of Westwood, she was a beacon of wisdom, always ready to extend a helping hand. Among all the students she had mentored, none were closer to her than Jason Miller. Jason had entered Westwood University as a struggling freshman, weighed down by personal demons and a crippling lack of confidence. Unlike most students who simply came and went, he had formed a unique bond with Professor Carter. She had helped him navigate financial hardships, counseled him through heartbreak, and even written glowing recommendations for internships, though he never seemed to land one. Jason wasn't just another student. He was her protege. To many, he was like a son to her. And to Jason, she was the one person who had never given up on him, no matter how many times he had stumbled. If there was one person in the world who would never harm Professor Carter, it was Jason Miller. At least that's what everyone thought. By his final year, Jason Miller was living a double life. To Professor Carter, he was still the troubled but redeemable student she had always believed in. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. His grades had plummeted. He skipped lectures. Assignments were left unfinished. The quiet desperation that once drove him to work harder had turned into something darker: recklessness. And worst of all, he had fallen in with a dangerous crowd: the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood wasn't just a group of troublemakers. They were notorious for bending rules, getting what they wanted at any cost. Their influence over Jason grew stronger each day, feeding off his frustrations. They whispered poison into his ear, convincing him that the system was rigged against him, that no matter how hard he tried, he would fail, that he needed to take control. Professor Carter noticed the shift, the way his once eager eyes had dulled, the way he avoided her gaze, the way his presence felt heavier, weighed down by something unsaid. One afternoon, she confronted him in her office. "Jason, you're not yourself," she said, her voice laced with concern. "Talk to me." His jaw tightened. "I just have a lot going on." She leaned forward. "Then let me help. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." He looked away. How could she possibly help? His parents had cut him off financially. They had given him a cruel ultimatum: graduate this semester or don't come home. He was drowning, and no amount of tutoring or study sessions would fix it. He didn't have time to work harder. He needed a way out. Fast. "Professor, I need to pass. I need this." His voice was raw, desperate. She sighed, her expression softening. "Jason, you're capable. I won't give you a grade you haven't earned, but I will help you. We can work together." It wasn't the answer he wanted. His desperation hardened into something colder. A plan started forming, one he could barely admit to himself. He had spent years under her guidance, learning her habits, her routines, earning her trust. And now that trust could be his greatest weapon. Then, as if reading his thoughts, one of the Brotherhood members leaned in close one night and murmured, "She trusts you, doesn't she?" Jason swallowed. "Yeah." The response came with a chilling smirk. "Then you already have what you need." First, Jason dismissed it, but the seed had been planted, and soon it would take root. November 2024. Professor Evelyn Carter sat at her desk, red pen in hand, grading final papers. The soft glow of her study lamp cast warm shadows across her living room. A cup of chamomile tea sat steaming beside her, its familiar scent calming her nerves after a long day. A knock at the door interrupted the quiet. She glanced at the clock. 9:47 p.m. Frowning, she placed her pen down and walked to the door. A chill ran down her spine, not from fear, but instinct. Still, when she peered through the peephole and saw Jason Miller standing outside, hands shoved into his hoodie pockets, she felt a wave of relief. "Jason?" she said, opening the door with a soft smile. "What's wrong? Can I come in?" His voice was strained, his eyes shifting nervously. "Of course." She stepped aside, allowing him in without hesitation. She had done this countless times before, offering him guidance, a safe space, and an open ear. But tonight was different. They talked just like old times. He spoke of his struggles, his fears, his desperation. She reassured him as she always did. And then he asked again, "Please just pass me, Professor. I'll make it up later, I promise." Her face softened, but her answer remained the same. "You know I can't do that, Jason, but I won't let you fail." Her words were cut short. Jason had already made up his mind. With a sudden, practiced motion, he reached into his hoodie and pulled out a knife. She barely had time to react before he plunged it into her side. Her eyes widened in shock. Jason, why?" she gasped, clutching her wound as crimson spread across her blouse. But there was no answer. Jason had shut down. His movements were mechanical, driven by fear and necessity. He stabbed again, and again, each thrust more violent, more desperate. Her body trembled as she staggered backward, colliding with the coffee table. Papers scattered, her teacup shattered, and she crumpled onto the carpet. Jason stood over her, panting, the knife still clutched in his shaking hand. Blood pooled around her, soaking into the fabric of her sweater. Yet, even in her final moments, she wasn't angry. She was heartbroken. Jason watched as the life drained from her eyes, the warmth fading, replaced by an eerie stillness. He hadn't just killed his professor. He had killed the only person who had ever truly believed in him. For a moment, the weight of what he had done settled over him like a suffocating fog. But then, he remembered why he was here. Shaking, he rushed to her desk, searching through her files, opening her laptop, frantic. The exam records had to be here. He just needed to change his grade, then leave. Then it would all be worth it. But as he scoured her documents, he found nothing. No unlocked files, no grade sheets, nothing he could alter. And that's when the horror of his mistake set in. Jason Miller had just killed for nothing. Breathing heavily, he wiped his prints from every surface he had touched. He grabbed the bloodied knife, stuffed it into his backpack, and sprinted out into the night, his heartbeat matching the rhythm of his pounding footsteps. Behind him, the house was silent. Professor Evelyn Carter, the woman who had spent her life helping others, lay motionless on the floor. The town's brightest light had been snuffed out by the very student she had sworn to guide. And no one knew yet. Westwood had always been a quiet town, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where crime was rare and murder was unthinkable. That's why, when news of Professor Evelyn Carter's death broke, it sent shockwaves through the university and the entire community. At first, no one suspected anything sinister. When Professor Carter didn't show up for her morning lecture, students assumed she was running late, an occurrence so rare that some joked about it. But when the minutes turned into hours, and her office remained dark and empty, unease crept in. By midday, concern turned into alarm. Calls to her phone went unanswered. Emails were left unread. It wasn't like her. Professor Carter was as reliable as the sunrise. Something was wrong. Across town, Mrs. Dawson, Professor Carter's elderly neighbor, had noticed something unusual that morning. The front door to the professor's house was slightly ajar, and the lights inside were still on from the night before. At first, she hesitated. Professor Carter was a private woman, and it wasn't her place to pry. But the longer she stared at the open door, the more unsettled she felt. Summoning her courage, Mrs. Dawson stepped inside. The first thing that hit her was the silence. An unnatural stillness hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She called out, her voice trembling. "Evelyn!" No answer. She took another step forward and saw it, the dark stain on the carpet. And then, her eyes landed on the motionless figure sprawled in the center of the living room. A scream ripped through the house, loud enough to send birds scattering from the trees outside. Mrs. Dawson stumbled back, clutching her chest, her breath coming in short gasps. Her frail hands trembled as she fumbled for her phone to dial 911. Within minutes, the flashing lights of police cars illuminated the quiet street, and the once peaceful neighborhood became the scene of a gruesome crime. Detective Paul Henderson was one of the first to arrive. A veteran in the force, he had seen his fair share of homicide scenes, but this one felt different. It wasn't just the brutality of the murder that disturbed him. It was the victim herself. Evelyn Carter wasn't the type to have enemies. If anything, she was beloved. Inside, the crime scene was methodical. Too methodical. The body had been left where it fell, blood soaking into the plush beige carpet. A shattered teacup lay nearby, its contents dried into a brown stain. The room showed signs of a struggle. Overturned furniture, a knocked-over lamp, but nothing suggested forced entry. "She let the killer in," Henderson murmured to himself, surveying the scene. Forensics began their work, dusting for prints, collecting fibers, analyzing the blood spatter patterns. But even in those first few moments, Henderson felt a sinking feeling in his gut. This wasn't going to be an easy case. By evening, the news had spread like wildfire. Students gathered in clusters across campus, whispering in hushed, horrified tones. The university issued an emergency statement, canceling classes for the next day and setting up grief counseling services. Professors who had known Evelyn for years struggled to comprehend what had happened. The most unsettling part? No one could think of a single person who would want to hurt her. She had no enemies, no ongoing disputes, no troubled past. So who would do this? And why? As the sun set over Westwood, one thing was clear. The hunt for Evelyn Carter's killer had begun. Detective Paul Henderson had seen many killers in his career. Some were sloppy, undone by panic. Others were calculated, arrogant enough to believe they could outsmart the law. But Jason Miller? He was different. If Henderson hadn't known better, he would have believed Jason was just another grieving student. He played his role flawlessly, his eyes glassy with sorrow, his hands shaking just enough to seem genuine, his words measured and controlled whenever he spoke about Professor Evelyn Carter. But Henderson wasn't fooled. From the moment he laid eyes on Jason, his gut told him something was off. There was grief, yes, but it was too rehearsed, too precise. The problem? Gut feelings don't count as evidence. And Jason Miller had ensured there wasn't a shred of it left behind. The crime scene was pristine, almost too clean. No fingerprints, Jason had worn gloves. No blood trails, he had disposed of his clothes immediately after. No weapon, he had thrown it into a river miles away. No security footage, he had memorized the placement of cameras and avoided them. It was as if the killer had been a ghost. The only thing Jason hadn't erased was the motive. But even that was thin. Yes, he had failed Professor Carter's course. Yes, he had argued with her about his grades. Yes, he had been seen with the Brotherhood, a group of known troublemakers. But was that enough to kill her? Not in the eyes of the law. Without concrete proof, Jason Miller remained just another heartbroken student in a sea of mourners. And time was running out. Jason should have felt victorious. He had outsmarted the police. Every time he sat in class, surrounded by students whispering theories about who could have done it, he almost wanted to laugh. They'll never know. But then the dreams started. At first, they were just flashes of red. The color of her blood, the color of her car, the color of his guilt. Then came the whispers. Jason, why? Soft at first, like a distant echo in his head. But soon it followed him everywhere. In the rustling of the wind, in the hum of the streetlights, in the silence of his empty apartment. He could still feel it, the weight of the knife in his hand. He could still see it. The moment her body collapsed, her eyes wide with confusion, then fear, then a nothing. At night, he woke up gasping for breath, his heart pounding. During the day, he found himself glancing over his shoulder, as if she was still there, watching, waiting. The police weren't giving up. Detective Henderson could feel it. Jason was hiding something. But knowing and proving were two different things. So the detectives played a different game. They started watching Jason, his routine, his habits, his reactions. Every time a professor mentioned Professor Carter's name in class, Henderson watched from the back of the lecture hall. Jason flinched. Every time a student said, "I hope they catch whoever did this," Jason's grip tightened on his pen. He was cracking. Not enough to arrest him, but enough to push him. So Henderson pushed. They brought Jason in for questioning again. "Jason," Henderson said, his voice casual. Too casual. "You were close to Professor Carter, weren't you?" Jason nodded. "She was like family to me." Henderson leaned forward. "Family. Interesting. And yet she was murdered. Stabbed. Brutally. Almost personal, wouldn't you say?" Jason swallowed hard. His hands curled into fists. Henderson didn't stop. "See, Jason, killers always leave something behind. Maybe a mistake, maybe a regret, maybe a secret." Jason's breathing quickened. The room felt smaller, hotter. Henderson noticed. "Good. You'd tell me if you knew something, right, Jason?" A beat of silence. Then Jason stood up abruptly. "I need to go." Not a denial, just an escape. And Henderson knew Jason was going to break. That night, Jason sat in his apartment, alone. The walls felt too close. The air felt too thick. His hands trembled as he turned on the sink, trying to wash away the imaginary blood. It wouldn't go away. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He picked up. "Jason." A voice. Her voice. Professor Carter's voice. Jason froze. "Jason, why?" The phone slipped from his grip. He stumbled backward, gasping. It wasn't real. Couldn't be real. His own mind was turning against him, and he couldn't take it anymore. At 3:15 a.m., Jason walked into the Westwood police station. The rain soaked through his clothes, but he didn't care. Detective Henderson looked up, surprised. "Jason." Jason stared at him. His lips parted. His breath came in short, ragged bursts. And then, "I killed her." Silence. Jason collapsed into the chair, burying his face in his hands. His body shook. Not from the cold, not from fear, but from relief. Because finally it was over. He was no longer running. And guilt, in the end, had done what the detectives couldn't. It had caught the killer. The courtroom was thick with tension, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken words. The town of Westwood had come to a standstill as its residents gathered to witness the trial that had shaken their community to its core. The brutal murder of Professor Evelyn Carter was a wound that had yet to heal, and all eyes were now on the young man accused of committing the unthinkable. Jason Miller sat at the defendant's table, his expression an unreadable mask. He had once been one of the brightest students in Westwood University, Professor Carter's star pupil. Now he was on trial for her murder. The prosecution wasted no time presenting its case. Though Jason had been careful, erasing much of the physical evidence, the circumstantial proof was damning. His association with the Brotherhood, his failing grades, his desperate plea to Professor Carter, all of it painted a picture of a man with motive and opportunity. But what truly sealed his fate was his own confession, given in the dead of night when his mind could no longer silence his guilt. The moment Jason took the witness stand, the atmosphere in the room shifted. His once confident posture had withered. The weight of his crime now bore down on him like an iron chain. Elaine Harper, the sharp-eyed prosecutor, approached with calculated precision. She wasted no time. "Mr. Miller, you confessed to murdering Professor Carter. What was your reason?" Jason hesitated, his fingers gripping the edge of the witness stand as though it might keep him from unraveling. I had no other choice." His voice wavered, a stark contrast to the cold precision with which he had executed his crime. Harper's gaze sharpened. "No other choice?" she repeated, her voice laced with quiet disbelief. "Explain that to the jury." Jason exhaled sharply, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. "I was going to fail. Again. I needed to graduate and she wouldn't help me. She kept telling me to earn it, but I didn't have time for that." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, disgust and disbelief intertwining with the heavy silence. "So you thought murder was the solution?" Harper's voice remained eerily calm. Killing the very woman who had dedicated her life to helping students? Jason swallowed hard, sweat forming at his brow. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Harper didn't let up. Then tell us, Jason. How was it supposed to happen? He shifted in his seat, his breathing uneven. I thought if I got rid of her, I could get into her office, access the exam records, change my grades, and no one would ever know. I just needed to pass. Gasps filled the room. Some jurors turned away in disgust. Others stared, transfixed, as the reality of Jason's crimes settled upon them. This wasn't a crime of passion, nor a moment of madness. This was cold, calculated, premeditated murder for a grade. The judge banged his gavel. Order in the court. Harper took a step closer. And after you killed her? She pressed. What was the plan then? Jason's jaw tightened. I was going to wipe the records, make it look like a break-in gone wrong, and disappear before anyone could connect me to it. Harper let the silence linger, allowing the jury to absorb the horrifying truth. But you didn't disappear, did you? She said finally. Because no matter how carefully you planned, you overlooked one crucial flaw. Jason blinked, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. A guilty conscience never stays silent. The courtroom held its collective breath as the prosecutor turned to the jury. The murder of Professor Carter was not a moment of desperation. It was a calculated, deliberate act, committed by a man who valued a diploma more than the life of the woman who once called him family. Jason Miller had planned for everything, except the crushing weight of guilt that had driven him to confess. And now, as the final verdict loomed, the town of Westwood could finally begin to mourn the woman whose kindness had been repaid with betrayal. Westwood University stood eerily quiet the day the verdict was read. The halls that once echoed with Professor Evelyn Carter's voice now bore a solemn stillness. Students whispered in hushed tones, professors exchanged uneasy glances, and the town itself seemed to mourn alongside them. But while justice had been served, the scars left behind would never truly fade. Jason Miller had been sentenced to life in prison. No chance of parole, no escape, just four walls and the weight of his own actions pressing down on him every second of every day. The once charismatic student who had basked in Professor Carter's guidance was now nothing more than an inmate. Just another cautionary tale of how greed and desperation could twist even the most trusted into something unrecognizable. The trial had exposed everything. His calculated plan to murder the professor, his obsession with changing his grades, his betrayal of the one person who had never given up on him. The town of Westwood had watched in horror as Jason unraveled on the witness stand, his attempts to justify his actions crumbling under the weight of his own guilt. The very community that had once embraced him now looked upon him with disgust. But even in death, Professor Carter's legacy refused to be tainted by Jason's actions. The university wasted no time in ensuring her memory would endure. A scholarship was established in her honor, designed to support students who truly valued education, students who struggled but fought to succeed rather than taking shortcuts. The lecture hall where she had once taught was renamed the Evelyn Carter Memorial Hall, a permanent reminder of the values she had stood for. Every year, on the anniversary of her passing, students and faculty gathered for a candlelight vigil outside the very building where she had inspired so many. Stories were shared, memories cherished, and lessons remembered. And though her physical presence was gone, her influence remained deeply rooted in the hearts of those who had known her. But there was one lesson that stood out the most, a lesson carved into the very core of Westwood University's history. Some betrayals don't just shatter trust, they destroy lives. And sometimes, the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones lurking in the shadows. They're the ones standing right beside you, smiling, waiting for the perfect moment to strike.